Welcome back to Yehoshua's Daf Yomi Shiur, where the Daf continues daily until the complete revelation of Mashiach ben David, that is Messiah, the son of David. Today we'll be studying Tractate Chullin, page 68. We're starting a new chapter, chapter 4 of the Tractate Chullin, and it's on the top of the page. This chapter is called Behema Hamakasha. Hold on, let me see how to pronounce that right. Hamakasha. Fourth chapter of Chullin. And here we go with the Mishnah, top of the page. Behema Hamakasha leiled. V'hoitzi ha'ubar es yodoi v'echziroi. Mutar b'achilo. Hoitzi es roishoi. Afal pi shechziroi. Areze ki alud. When a pregnant kosher animal is slaughtered, the slaughterer also renders the consumption of its fetus permitted. If an animal was encountering difficulty giving birth, and meanwhile the fetus extended its foreleg outside the mother animal's womb, and then brought it back inside, and then the mother animal was slaughtered, the consumption of the fetus is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. I think it has a name to it, like Ben Pakua, I think. Okay. Fetus extended its foreleg outside the mother animal's womb, and then brought it back inside, and then the mother animal was slaughtered. The consumption of the fetus is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. But if the fetus extended its head outside the womb, even if it brought it back inside, the halachic status of that fetus is like that of a newborn, and the slaughter of the mother animal does not permit the consumption of the fetus. Rather, it requires its own slaughter. If prior to slaughtering an animal, one severs pieces from a fetus that is in the womb and leaves those pieces in the womb, their consumption is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. By contrast, if one severs pieces of the spleen or of the kidneys of an animal and then slaughters it, then, even if those pieces are left inside the animal, their consumption is prohibited because an organ severed from a living being is not permitted by the subsequent slaughter of the animal. This is the principle. An item that is part of an animal's body that was severed prior to its slaughter is prohibited even after its slaughter. And an item that is not part of its body, meaning its fetus, is permitted by virtue of its slaughter. Okay? And now, the Talmud. The Gemara says, Amar Yehuda Marav, the Gemara qualifies the first ruling of the Mishnah. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, but as for the limb itself, meaning the foreleg, its consumption is prohibited, even though the fetus brought it back inside prior to the slaughter. My taima, what's the reason? The Amar Kra ubasar basadeh treifa lo tochelu. Kevan shatza basar chutz lemechitza so ne'esa. What is the reason for this? It is, as the verse states, and flesh in the field, a treifa, you shall not eat. Exodus 22, verse 30. A treifa is an animal with a wound that will cause it to die within 12 months. Its consumption is prohibited even if it is ritually slaughtered. The Gemara interprets the verse as teaching a principle. Once flesh, whose permitted status is dependent on being within a certain area, for example, sacrificial meat within the temple courtyard, has gone outside of its boundary, meaning the area in which it is permitted, which the verse describes as being in the field, it becomes permanently prohibited like a treifa. Likewise, the permitted status of a fetus is dependent on its being within the womb when the mother animal is slaughtered. Accordingly, if any part of the fetus leaves the womb before the slaughter, it is rendered permanently prohibited. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, V'hoitzi ha'uber es yadoi v'echziroi mutar v'achilo ma'ilav ha'aver lo ha'ubar. The Gemara raises a difficulty. We learned in the Mishnah, if an animal was encountering difficulty giving birth, and as a result the fetus extended its foreleg outside the mother animal's body, but then brought it back, and then the animal was slaughtered, the consumption of the fetus is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. The Gemara assumes, what? Is the Mishnah not referring to the entire fetus, including the limb, meaning the foreleg, when it states that its consumption is permitted by the slaughter? This would contradict Rav's ruling. The Gemara answers no. The Mishnah is referring to the rest of the fetus apart from the foreleg. I aubar ma'iria hechaziro afilu lo hechziro nami hu adin afal gav de lo hechziro v'aydi dekol b'ayim misna seifa hoitzi eschoi shoi afal pi shechziroi harei ze ki yalud tanonam yirei sho hechziro. The Gemara asks, if the Mishnah is referring to the rest of the fetus, why state specifically that the fetus brought back its foreleg? Even if it did not bring it back, the rest of the fetus would still be permitted. The Gemara answers the same is true, that the rest of the fetus is permitted, even if it did not bring back its foreleg. But since the Tana of the Mishnah wants to teach in the latter clause, if the fetus extended its head, even though it brought it back, the halachic status of that fetus is like that of a newborn and is permitted only through its own slaughter. Therefore, he also taught in the first clause that the fetus brought back its foreleg for stylistic reasons, despite the fact that the ruling is not limited to that case. The Seifa my kamash melan dikevan yatzeroi shoy havaya la dileda tenena eze bechol lenachala ve'enu bechol lekohanim haba achar nifolim afal pi yatzeroi shoy chai oy ben tishosh yatzeroi shoy meis. The Gemara asks, and concerning this latter clause itself, what does it teach us? Does it teach that once the fetus extended its head, that it is considered a birth? We have already learned this in a Mishnah in Bechorot 46a. Who is considered a firstborn with regard to inheritance, but is not considered a firstborn with regard to the requirement to be redeemed by giving 5 shekels to the priests? It is a son who came after the miscarriage of an underdeveloped fetus. The Mishnah adds that the category of stillbirth includes the case of a child who did not reach full term, even if its head emerged alive, or a fully developed 9-month-old fetus whose head emerged dead. Taima deroi shoy meis haroi shoy chai haba charav b'choran lachala nami lo have. The Gemara infers from the final clause of the Mishnah the reason a son born following the miscarriage is considered a firstborn with regard to inheritance is that the head of the miscarriage emerged only after it was already dead. But if its head had initially emerged alive, even if it then died before being fully delivered, the son born after him would not be considered a firstborn, even with regard to inheritance. Apparently, this is because the emergence of the head alive is considered a birth, and therefore any subsequent child cannot be considered the firstborn. Evidently, it is unnecessary for the Mishnah here to teach this definition of a birth. And if you would say that the Mishnah there teaches us the definition of birth with regard to a person, and the Mishnah here teaches us that the same definition applies to an animal, another problem remains, as the Gemara will presently explain. De'adam mi behema lo yolif, de'ein prosdor le behemo, ubehema mi adam lo yalvo, de'chashiv parsuf panim lidei. Before explaining the problem with this suggestion, the Gemara explains why it is necessary to teach the definition with regard to both people and animals, because the definition of birth with regard to a person cannot be derived from that of an animal, as an animal does not have a concealed opening to the womb, unlike women whose thighs conceal the opening to their womb. Consequently, even if the definition were stated with regard to an animal, one might limit it to animals, as that state is immediately visible, whereas in women it is not. And conversely, the definition of birth with regard to an animal cannot be derived from that of a person, as the form of a person's face is significant because people are created in the image of God, and their faces bear the mark of their intelligence, which is not true of animals. Consequently, perhaps the emergence of the head alone is considered a birth only with regard to a person. Hanami tanino shilios yososo mikzoso asura beachilo kesiman vlad beisho kach siman vlad bebehemo. The Gemara proceeds to explain why the above suggestion is not a solution. With regard to this halacha, also, that the emergence of the head of an animal is considered a birth, we have already learned it in the Mishnah on 77a. If part of the placenta emerged from the womb of an animal before it was slaughtered, its consumption is permitted even after the mother animal is slaughtered. The reason for this is just as the placenta is an indication of the presence of a fetus in the woman, so too it is an indication of the presence of a fetus in an animal. Consequently, it is possible that the part of the placenta that emerged contained the head of the fetus, and accordingly it would be considered to have been born. The slaughter of the mother animal would therefore not permit it for consumption. Evidently, it is unnecessary for the Mishnah here to teach the definition of a birth, even with regard to an animal. The Gemara has established that the latter clause does not teach any novelty. Accordingly, it returns to challenging Rav's ruling. Granted, the Mishnah is understood if you say that the statement that the fetus is brought its foreleg back inside the mother animal, which is mentioned in the first clause of the Mishnah, is written specifically in order to teach the novelty that the foreleg is permitted if it was brought back before the slaughter, in contrast to Rav's ruling. If so, then one can claim that the Mishnah taught it in the latter clause due to the first clause, so that they would be parallel stylistically, and no novelty is necessary in the latter clause. Ela yamrit lo dresha davka v'lo desefra davka lamale lemisne klal. But if you say the first clause is not written specifically and does not teach a novelty, but rather the Mishnah is referring to the permitted status of the rest of the fetus, which is permitted even if it does not bring back its foreleg, and you also say the latter clause is not written specifically to teach a novelty, since the definition of birth is already taught in a Mishnah elsewhere. Then why does it need to teach the halacha that the foreleg or head were brought back at all? Perforce, the first clause must be referring to the permitted status of the foreleg and limiting it specifically to the case where it was brought back inside. This contradicts Rav's ruling. Lo Lo'ilam Auba v'kedamar Nachman bar Yitzchak Lo nitzcha l'mekom chasoch Ochanami lo nitzcha l'mekom chasoch. The Gemara responds, no. Actually, the Mishnah is referring to the permitted status of the rest of the fetus, but nevertheless, the statement that the fetus brought back its foreleg does teach a novelty. This is similar to that which Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, in explanation of a ruling in a Braita cited below, that it is necessary only with regard to the location of a cut limb on the fetus's body, if the foreleg were to be severed at precisely the point that lay on the boundary between the inside and the outside of the womb, then the location of the cut on the fetus's body would also be prohibited. Here too, one can explain that the ruling is necessary only with regard to the location of the cut, and it teaches that if the fetus did not bring back its foreleg, then not only is the foreleg prohibited, but the location of the cut is also prohibited. Toshima behema hamak sheleled hoitziu bor es yodoi v'echziro yachar kach shochet es imoi mutar b'achilo shochet es imoi yachar kach echziro es b'achilo. The Gemara suggests coming to hear a challenge to Rav's ruling from a Braita. If an animal was encountering difficulty giving birth, and as a result the fetus extended its foreleg outside the mother animal's body, and then brought it back inside, and then afterward one slaughtered its mother, its consumption is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. But if one first slaughtered its mother, and only afterward did the fetus return its foreleg back inside, its consumption is prohibited. Hoitzies yodoi v'chatochoi v'achar kach shochet es imoi shebachutz tomei v'osur v'shebifnim toer umutor. If the fetus extended its foreleg outside and one cut it off, and then afterward one slaughtered its mother, then the part of the foreleg that was outside that was cut off is ritually impure, and its consumption is prohibited, as it has the status of a limb cut from a living animal, which is forbidden, and the rest of the fetus that was inside is ritually pure, and its consumption is permitted by virtue the slaughter of the mother animal. If one slaughtered its mother and only afterward cut off the foreleg that has been extended outside, and now 68b, Habasar Maganeveilo Divrei Meir, that the flesh of both the mother animal and the fetus, excluding the foreleg, is impure due to contact with the carcass. Since the foreleg of the now dead fetus was not permitted to an act of slaughtering, it is rendered as a carcass. It therefore imparts impurity to the rest of the flesh which was in contact with it. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim oimrim magat trefa shchuta. The rabbis say, although the slaughter of the mother animal does not permit the consumption of the foreleg, it does serve to prevent the foreleg from imparting the ritual impurity of a carcass. Accordingly, the flesh has a status of having been in contact with the slaughtered treifa. By Torah law, Consumption of the animal is prohibited, but it does not impart ritual impurity. The sages decreed it to be impure, in that it disqualifies sacrificial flesh with which it comes in contact. Okay, stop here.